Nathaniel Hawthorne is probably best known for his work, The Scarlet Letter. His writings focused on themes of inherent evil and sin. They have moral messages and deep psychological complexities. One of the beliefs that Hawthorne inherited from his Puritan ancestors fascinated him, and it was the concept of the unforgivable sin. In his story, Ethan Brand, Ethan goes off in search of the unforgivable sin. So for 18 years, he wanders the world investigating all the sources and the manifestations of human iniquity. And on the day in which the story takes place, he finally returns from his quest with his goal achieved, and his friends ask him, what is the sin, the unforgivable sin? He says, it is a sin that grew within my own breast, a sin that grew nowhere else, the sin of an intellect that triumphed over the sense of brotherhood with man and reverence for God, and sacrificed everything to its own mighty claims. And then Ethan Brand laid his finger on his heart, and he said, here. He realized that he himself had set himself up as the analyst and the judge of others' folly and wickedness. And thus he lost, or rather rejected, his capacity for empathy, his ability to understand other people's suffering. The expansion of his intellect, his mind, led to the constriction of his heart. And Hawthorne writes that his heart had indeed withered, had contracted, had hardened, had perished. It had ceased to partake of the universal throb. Ethan realized that he became a cold observer, a fiend. Now, at the conclusion of the story, Ethan Brand, with his mission fulfilled, climbs into a furnace to his death. And the next morning, his bones are found, and within the rib cage, what seems to be a heart is turned to stone. Thus, Hawthorne suggests this is the final destiny of those who choose to sever the bonds that join us to all of our brothers and sisters, and thus to the one who created us. Very Hawthorne. The scripture readings this fifth Sunday of Lent call you and me to a radically different choice. The symbolism of the heart that is so central to Hawthorne's story is, of course, one with deep biblical resonances. It represents the innermost self, the deepest grounding of our being, the root and the source, in Thomas Merton's words, of all of one's own inner truth. So to discover one's heart is to recover an awareness of one's deepest identity as created for and by God. In that final image of Ethan Brand's marble heart, we see that Hawthorne consciously reversed that famous image that Ezekiel gives to us in the First Testament, where he writes, I will give you a new heart and place a new spirit within you, taking from your bodies your stony hearts. Well, as I read these scripture readings, I think the challenge for us comes from that responsorial psalm that Liam sang so well. Create a clean heart in me, O God. I think this weekend it's good for all of us to look at what's in our hearts today. The challenge, I believe, is to open our hearts so as to not reject our membership in the broad human community. Open our hearts so as not to be cold observers of life with stony hearts, avoiding that universal throb, the pain that is certainly all around us. Today, as we celebrate St. Patrick's Day, we know that Patrick was aware of this universal throb, that Patrick had a passion for justice, that he upheld the rights of every single human being and saw that every single human being was made in the image of God. Now, in the midst of all the joys of life, certainly life challenges us all continually. So it would be very easy to be stony observers sitting in front of our television sets with our wine and our cheese, watching the tragedies occurring around our world, and then quickly turning to Netflix so as not to be upset. It's a great temptation to become cold observers, to disconnect, to see school shootings as the normal. So we need to be connected. We need to be connected with our fellow human beings, whoever they are, wherever they are. We need to see all men and women as creatures of God that we are connected to and not separate from. I think we all know that there's tremendous division in our world, in our community, in our church. It's so easy for any of us to identify with a group and then believe that every other group is the enemy. That gospel today also challenges us. The grain of wheat that we hear in the gospel that has to die so that fruit can be born. That's another challenge. There are many things, if we're going to create a new and clean heart, that we have to die to. That at times we have to die to our own individualism. That we have to die to the tribalism that we've created in our country and in our world. That we have to die to the belief that sometimes we hold that we are superior to other human beings because of our race, our gender, whatever it might be. That we have to die often to our wants so that for the betterment of the human community, for the betterment of the common good. Ethan Brand discovered the only unforgivable sin, and that is detaching ourselves, feeling that we're separate from one another, not created by the same one God. So let each of us this fifth Sunday of Lent place a finger right here, each one of us, on our own heart. Let us ask ourselves, what's in my heart right now towards other human beings? Am I a cold observer? Has my heart turned to stone? And do I need to pray, as we just heard sung, for a clean heart?